It was a typical Saturday night, and 5 friends gathered for a sleepover at Claire's house. They were all 16-year-olds and had known each other since elementary school. As the night progressed, they grew bored of watching movies and playing board games. They needed something exciting to do.
"I have an idea,"
said Jason, the class clown.
"Let's play Truth or Dare."
Everyone groaned.
"Come on, guys, it'll be fun."
Jason persisted.
"Fine,
said Claire, the hostess.
but we have to make it interesting."
Agreed.
Said Mary, the shy one.
I'm in.
After a few tame rounds, things started to heat up.
"Okay, Claire. Truth or Dare?"
Truth.
Claire said confidently.
"Have you ever stolen anything?"
Claire hesitated before admitting.
Yes, I once stole a pack of gum when I was 9.
Everyone laughed, and the game continued. Then it was Mary's turn.
"Truth or Dare?"
Jason asked her.
Truth.
Mary said softly.
"Have you ever had a crush on anyone in this room?"
Jason asked, winking at her. Mary's face turned bright red as she stammered.
No.
Come on, Mary, spill the beans.
Said Claire, playfully nudging her.
Well, maybe a little bit.
Mary admitted, glancing shyly at Tyler, the handsome jock. Everyone laughed again, and then it was Tyler's turn.
"Okay, Jason. Truth or dare?"
Tyler said, grinning.
"Dare, of course."
"I dare you to spend the night in the Rosewood Manor."
Tyler said, smirking. Jason's face fell as he realized the gravity of the situation. Rosewood Manor was once a sprawling Victorian mansion that sat on the outskirts of the small town. It was a beautiful house, with ornate detailing and a grand entrance that invited visitors inside, but beneath its exterior charm lay a dark history that no amount of refurbishment could erase. Decades ago, Rosewood Manor was home to a wealthy couple, Thomas and Elizabeth. Thomas was a successful businessman, and Elizabeth was a beautiful and charming woman. But behind closed doors, their marriage was far from perfect. Thomas was a controlling and abusive husband, and Elizabeth lived in constant fear of him. One fateful night, Thomas's temper flared, and he flew into a rage. Elizabeth, fearing for her life, tried to flee the house, but Thomas caught up to her and murdered her in a fit of rage. He buried her body in the cellar, thinking he had gotten away with his heinous act, but the house never forgot what had happened within its walls. Strange occurrences began to happen. Doors would slam shut on their own, cold drafts would sweep through the rooms, and unexplainable noises echoed through the halls. Eventually, the townspeople began to whisper that Rosewood Manor was haunted by the ghost of Elizabeth, seeking vengeance on her cruel husband. Over the years, the house changed hands many times, but no owner could shake off the feeling of unease that permeated the house. Despite attempts to renovate and modernize, the house remained stuck in time, a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had taken place there. Today, Rosewood Manor remains unoccupied, its doors locked tight to keep out curious visitors, but some say that on quiet nights, the ghost of Elizabeth still roams the halls seeking justice for the injustice she suffered at the hands of her husband.
"Are you serious?"
Jason asked, trying to sound brave.
"Dead serious,"
Tyler said, nodding. Jason hesitated for a moment before finally agreeing.
"Fine, I'll do it, but you have to come with me."
Tyler shook his head.
"No way, man. This is your dare, not mine."
After a bit of arguing, Jason finally relented and agreed to go alone. The group wished him good luck, and he set off into the night. As Jason approached Rosewood Manor, a chill ran down his spine. The house loomed over him, its towering form casting a shadow over the entire property. The once grand facade was now faded and peeling, and the windows were dark and foreboding. As he stepped closer, he couldn't help but notice the overgrown weeds and tangled vines that seemed to be reclaiming the house. They snaked up the walls, twisted around the columns, and choked the once beautiful garden that surrounded the property. The front door was slightly ajar, and Jason could see the darkness beyond, as if the house was swallowing him up before he even entered. The air around him felt heavy, as if he was walking through a thick fog that clung to his skin and made it hard to breathe. Every creak of the house seemed to echo through the silence, making it seem as if the house itself was alive and watching him. He could hear the rustling of something in the bushes nearby, and he couldn't help but wonder what kind of creatures lurked in the shadows. As he stepped inside, the air grew colder, and Jason shivered despite himself. The once grand hallway was now dusty and cobweb-covered, and the walls seemed to be closing in on him. Every step echoed through the empty halls, making it seem as if he was not alone in the house. Jason cautiously made his way through the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. As he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the walls themselves were closing in on him. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards made him jump, and he found himself holding his breath, afraid to make any noise. He tried to shake off the fear and remind himself that he was here for a dare, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But as he explored the house, he realized that this was not just an abandoned building. It was a place of darkness and despair. The rooms were filled with dust and cobwebs, and the furniture was covered in tattered sheets, as if it had been abandoned for decades. The air was thick with the musty smell of old books and mold, and Jason couldn't help but wonder what kind of secrets this house was hiding. He searched for a good spot to spend the night, trying to find a room that was free of the eerie feeling that seemed to permeate the house. But every room he entered seemed to be colder, darker, and more sinister than the last. Finally, he found a room at the end of the hallway that seemed to be free of the haunting feeling that plagued the rest of the house. It was a small, cramped room, with a single window that looked out onto the overgrown garden. He set up a makeshift bed in the corner, using a pile of dusty old books as a pillow, and settled in for the night. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, that the ghost of Elizabeth was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. As he closed his eyes and tried to get some sleep, he couldn't help but wonder if he would make it through the night. He heard a faint whisper in his ear. At first he thought it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, but then he heard it again, a woman's voice, distant but clear. He sat up, his heart pounding, and strained to listen. It was a conversation between Elizabeth and her husband Thomas, the same argument that had led to her murder all those years ago. Jason couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was as if he was there, witnessing the tragedy unfolding before him. He watched in horror as Thomas grabbed Elizabeth by the throat, his face contorted with rage, and strangled her to death. But the horror was not over yet. As he watched, Thomas dragged her lifeless body to the cellar, digging a hole and burying her there. Jason felt sick to his stomach as he realized the full extent of the tragedy that had taken place in this house. Suddenly, the vision stopped and Jason was back in the present. But then, to his shock and horror, Elizabeth appeared before him, her ghostly figure hovering in the air. Jason was frozen in fear, unable to move or speak, but Elizabeth spoke to him. Her voice was cold and piercing, filled with anger and resentment.
"You look just like him,"
she said, her eyes boring into his.
"Thomas was cruel and heartless, just like you. You must suffer as I did, trapped in this house for eternity."
Jason tried to protest, tried to explain that he was not Thomas, that he was not responsible for what had happened to her. But Elizabeth would not listen, and her voice only grew more menacing.
"You cannot escape your fate. You must pay for what he did to me. You must suffer, as I suffered."
As she spoke, Jason could feel a coldness creeping over him, as if he was being pulled into a dark and infinite void. He tried to resist, tried to break free from her hold, but it was as if her words had cast a spell on him. He felt a surge of fear and panic rising in his chest, and he knew that he had to escape the house before it was too late. He stumbled to his feet and ran toward the door, his heart pounding in his chest. As he burst out into the night air, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. He got on his bike and pedaled as fast as he could, the wind whipping through his hair and his heart pounding in his chest. He was still reeling from the terrifying experience he had just had in Rosewood Manor, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Elizabeth's ghostly figure was still haunting him. When he finally arrived at Claire's house, he burst through the front door, gasping for breath. His friends looked up, startled by his sudden entrance, and then burst out laughing.
"What's so funny?"
Jason demanded, his voice shaking with fear and frustration.
"You lost the dare, man,"
Tyler said, grinning.
"We all knew you wouldn't make it through the night in that creepy old house."
Jason tried to explain what had happened, tried to tell them about the visions he had seen and the ghostly figure that had appeared before him, but they just laughed and rolled their eyes, dismissing his story as a joke.
It was just your imagination,
Claire said, trying to soothe him.
You know how creepy that old house is. You probably just scared yourself.
But Jason knew what he had seen, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Elizabeth's ghostly figure was still lurking in the shadows, watching him, waiting for him to return to the house. As his friends settled in for the night, laughing and joking and oblivious to the danger that lurked just beyond the walls of Claire's house, Jason lay awake, his heart pounding in his chest. Eventually, Jason gave up and went to bed, his mind still reeling from his encounter with the ghostly woman. He tried to sleep, but the memory of her haunted him, and he tossed and turned all night. As the morning sun rose over the quiet suburban street, the group stirred awake, rubbing their eyes and stretching their limbs. But as they looked around, they noticed that one of their own was missing.
Where's Jason?
Claire asked, her voice laced with concern. The group searched the house, calling out Jason's name, but there was no answer. They tried calling his house, but his parents thought he was with the group at Claire's house. Panic began to set in as the group realized that Jason was nowhere to be found. The police were called, and the group explained what had happened the night before at Rosewood Manor. They told the officers about the dare and about Jason's encounter with Elizabeth's ghost, but the police dismissed it as just a story. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but there was still no sign of Jason. The police searched the area around Rosewood Manor, but there was no trace of the missing teenager. As the years passed, the group drifted apart, each going their separate ways and starting new lives. But they never forgot the dare that had gone wrong, and they never forgot the friend they had lost. And as for Elizabeth, her ghostly presence continued to linger, a reminder of the tragic past that had unfolded in Rosewood Manor. Some say that she wasn't alone anymore, that the ghost of Jason had joined her in her eternal search for vengeance. But no one knows for sure what happened to Jason, and his fate remains a mystery to this day. The only thing that is certain is that the abandoned house still stands, its dark halls and haunted chambers waiting for the brave and the foolish to enter. So beware the Rosewood Manor, where the ghosts of the past still roam. Maybe it's just a tale, but those who dare to enter never come back the same.